Why should you run more miles than you think during your off season or between racing and running training goals? That's what we're chatting here today. Hello there, my friends, and welcome back to the Messy Middle Podcast / the Dockless Fitness YouTube. As always, you can find this podcast on your favorite podcast platform or this video live over on my YouTube if you want to follow along there as well. No matter where you're tuning in from, if you can like, subscribe, comment, rate, review, whatever it is, wherever you're at, it helps me to continue to just keep providing free educational content for you guys to keep learning here with me on my channels or my platform. So with all that said, let's dive in. So today I want to chat about why you should maintain a higher running base or more miles in your off season or between running goals if you have the goal to keep running long term, or you have future goals, or you want to gain fitness across years or multiple seasons of training. One of the most common mistakes I see with many clients or people that I talk to on social media and the DMs, Q&As, comments, and or just working with runners over the last 5 years that I've been coaching and training is essentially people will basically go on, off, be hot, cold with their running. And then they feel frustrated when they can't return to a running goal as quickly as they did before. They're not breaking PRs, or, I get met with a lot of resistance personally as a coach or a person when I suggest to people that they have to start lower than the goal they have in order to work up to it because their mileage base just isn't there. So let's first define what a mileage base is. A baseline mileage is essentially the amount of miles that you've been running basically on average for at least 4 weeks, if not 6 to 8 or maybe 12 weeks before leading into a specific racing or running goal. The bigger your base is, the quicker you can ramp up into bigger goals, and or the more consistent your base is, the more you kind of have to pull from when it comes to then shifting to more specific running or racing goals. And so the size of this base will depend on the goal that you have. And so something I have in the List Method training programs are these base build programs. They range from 10 to 15, 15 to 20, 20 to 30, and 30 to 40 miles per week. And that essentially is the foundation of running that you either can maintain in the off season when your running priorities or goals are lower, or I like using them as a base build, essentially leading into a race training goal for those of you who potentially do not have a high running base, or you need more consistent mileage to develop that aerobic fitness that you need before kind of peaking and prepping for a goal race. Now, these can also be used as a bridge for people who potentially don't have the miles on feet that they need to get them to the goal that they have, as a way to kind of extend their training duration to get to that goal appropriately while reducing the nags and niggles that come with people ramping up things too fast too soon. So essentially all it is, whether you're using the List Method programs or doing it on your own, is a phase of 6, 8, maybe 12 weeks of consistent mileage being linked together that's very similar, or slowly increasing your volume over time, kind of building up that area under the curve before then you kind of lead into the specific race training phase that's maybe 8 or 12 weeks long that is specifically preparing you for the goal that you have. Now, some people, when they want to run a half marathon or a marathon or a 10K or 5K, whatever the race it may be, road or trail, they think, well, I want to run this race, so I'm just going to do it. And they don't have enough time to both ramp up their miles and peak and prep for that race. Now, the first time you train for a race, it just might be about finishing and getting the mileage there. But we want to make sure we're actually enjoying our race training experiences, and being well trained and well prepared for that is the number one way to do that. And so for many people, what happens is they run a race and they stop running, or they only maintain a few runs here or there, and they think, okay, 6, 8, 9 months down the road, I'm going to run another race, or I want to do this bigger goal this time. And they think that the mileage or the fitness that they had when they completed that race goal is what their current fitness is. And here's the tough love reality for many of my runners here is that, one, after about a month of not really consistently training, you do start to detrain and lose your aerobic fitness adaptations. Now, if you have a strong running history and base, this will come back a little bit more quickly, but it does start to dissipate. So don't confuse the fitness you have when you're peaking for your past race or a big event that you did in the past, or a very strong period of time in your life where you're running a lot, for the fitness you have now. If anything, think of it as just the potential that you have within you, and don't get defeated by that. We're not meant to be in peak racing season year round. You will lose some fitness in the off season or between goals, or you won't be at peak all the time. That's not what I'm trying to imply here. But recognize that the fitness you kind of had during that training and preparation for that, if you stop maintaining some semblance of that training, will decrease or go away, especially if you stop running altogether or really reduce it to maybe 5 or less than 10 miles per week, depending on where you're at. So really think about how much you're maintaining during that, and recognizing that you won't maintain that all the time if you just kind of go, oh, I'm going to train up and take time off. Oh, I'm going to train up. I'm going to take time off. And what I'm trying to encourage you all here today is that if you plan to continue to run or race, 6, 9, 12 months later, to maintain some semblance of that base of what you need for the goals that you have. This will allow you then when you're like, hey, I want to sign up for this race, or my friend wants to do this thing, or oh my gosh, I'm FOMOing, everyone I know is doing this. You will have the fitness to say yes to that goal because you'll be able to ramp up quicker and or more efficiently, or pull from the fitness you have to do the goal that you're trying to accomplish. Versus if you just stop running altogether in your off season, or you really ramp down to a low baseline mileage and you set these really big goals, especially for my half marathons, full marathons, ultra marathons, we really have to be honest with ourselves about the baseline mileage we need kind of going into those things. And so I'm encouraging you essentially here today that if you are somebody who's like, hey, I want to run a fall race, and then spring rolls around, I want to run a race again, but you haven't run all winter, for example, or vice versa, summer versus winter. I know not everyone loves summer running. Really think about, okay, well, I don't need to maintain 100% of my peak mileage, but maybe pulling back about 30% of that and maintaining kind of maybe no less than 30 if we want to maintain some semblance of fitness, especially if we're working on strength work or whatever that is in the off season or cross training, and just keeping some running and time on our feet so that when we do turn around to ramp back up for another goal, we have that base going into this. Now, let me give you some reasons why. For many of you, you might think, well, my cardio's good. I've still been really fit. I've been lifting in the off season. I've been doing like CrossFit or aerobic conditioning or, different forms of cross training. And the biggest argument for this is it's not that your cardiovascular system might not be able to handle or take that ramp back up of your training or your volume, or you mentally or physically won't be able to handle it. But really what happens is the deconditioning of your connective tissues. And that is the thing that I want you guys to really think about here. Because so many people make the mistake of saying, well, I can just go run 5 miles. I'm fine. Or, well, I did a half marathon a year ago. Why can't I just jump into running now? And they want to double their mileage right off the bat, or ramp up into training and have no accumulation phase for their body for easing back in. And then what happens is your connective tissue. So when we think of that, your tendons, your ligaments, your muscles, all of the things that we often kind of associate with the nags and niggles of running, the shin splints, the plantar fasciitis, the Achilles tendonitis, the foot pain, the ankle pain, maybe some of the knee pain, things like that. Running is a very, very repetitive impact activity on our bodies, and we want springiness and stiffness and resilience in those tissues to be able to handle that. And essentially we develop that with accumulation of the volume or the stimulus of that over time. This is a big reason that you will constantly see me or pretty good run coaches or even physical therapists be strong proponents of not only strength training, especially for things that support your tendons, so isolations, calf work, proper, well-loaded strength training, things like that, and plyometrics, but also easing in and managing your training volume in a way that you can actually adapt and to recover from, and not ramping up your training way quicker than you're prepared for, or doubling mileage right off the bat. It can feel really easy to do when you're like, well, I've done this in the past, I know I can do it, or my cardio feels fine, why can't my body do it? But we want to keep that consideration of, our soft tissues or our connective tissues or all these other things that are allowing us to produce force to run while we're doing it, to give them the time to adapt. So this doesn't mean that you have to maintain like a bajillion miles a week in the off season or always be in marathon shape. Absolutely not. But what I'm suggesting is that you kind of be honest with yourself about either, do I need to maintain more miles if I want to continue with my progression or my goals into next year or 6 months from now or in the future? Or if you don't do that, being okay with taking longer buildups or longer timelines to get to your goals, and recognizing that the fitness that you once have is not necessarily the fitness you have now. I think this is even harder for people who potentially take multiple years off running. They fell out of the swing of things. They got out of the rhythm of running. They took a long break. They lost a lot of fitness, and it can feel really defeating because you could do something at one point in time and now you can't. You want to jump back into it, and your body isn't quite ready for that stressor. And that itself then leads to nags and niggles and pains or frustration, or you're not making progress because you're not giving your body the time and space it needs to ease it and to adapt to this. The exception to this rule kind of is the people who do spend that downtime doing the things that support things. So making sure you're continuing with the strength training, the plyometric works, maybe isometrics, calf work, strengthening of these lower body support systems for running, and having a little bit of that exposure in your training across the year while you're doing everything. Shameless plug for the List Method Perform program, which I programmed, has a lot of this stuff for you, and making sure you're maintaining that along with a decent amount of running volume to support your goal. Now, I can recognize that this is probably really confusing for those of you who are like, well, what the heck kind of running volume do I need for my different goals? So let me go through some kind of pseudo scenarios of each kind of running base that you might need, depending on who you're at and where you're at and the goal that you have. And so when we think about the mileage or the volume needed, and I'm sorry for my friends that use kilometers because I can't convert right off the bat in the top of my head. When we're thinking about like running a 5K or being in 5K shape, I would probably maintain, like once you've worked up and built up to a 5K, and if you're looking for programs to help you do that, we have our beginner runner and our 5K beginner, and we can help you do that, easing in over 3 to 6 months to kind of work up to that volume, depending on where you're starting from. If you're looking to try to maintain just like 5K shape, you're not trying to crush a PR every time you do it. You just want to be in shape to always kind of wing a 5K, run a 5K at any point in time, things like that. I would kind of maintain a base or frequency of running at least 2 days per week, maybe 3, and or running probably 1 to 2 miles at least at a time, if not 20 to 30 minutes, 2 to 3 days a week, I think is a good base to aim for if you're trying to aim for just maintaining 5K shape. Now, if you're looking to PR a 5K or do, have a better performance or improve these things over time, that's when we want to get more specific. So that might start looking like you're maintaining the 3 days a week of running. You're maintaining that frequency. You are having, maybe 30 to 60 minutes per run for that, maybe 1 speed work per day, workout per week if you're someone who's accumulated and adapted to that, and keeping some of that turnover on your legs in the off season and or keeping up that frequency a little bit, and maybe thinking about sitting around at least maybe that 8 to 15 mile per week range ish, depending on your goals. And obviously can be more if you're more fit, have more specific goals, you're a little bit more intermediate plus of a runner here or advanced when it comes to your training experience and fitness. But really when we think about that, I think those are kind of some rough ranges for that. Similar with the 10K, if you want to be able to maintain a 10K kind of distance or race or keeping that in your back pocket or being able to train for that at any point in time, I would probably have at least a baseline at any given point in time to ramp up to train for a 10K of a 3-mile long run and or probably that 8 to 15 mile per week range, kind of that we just finished at when we were thinking about that 5K baseline that we want. If you're trying to ramp up to a 10K, maybe 6, 8 to 12 weeks there, depending on where you're at. And if you want to be able to kind of wing it and run a 10K at any point in time or quickly and turning around that, I would probably maintain something a little bit closer to a 45 to 60 minute long run, 5 to 6 miles, potentially being able to do that almost any given week, at least maybe twice a month, being exposed to that on a long run distance, and having probably 3 days a week of running. Again, maybe 30 minutes, and 60 minutes might be a good kind of baseline to aim for when we were thinking about kind of those minimums or goals, and or kind of sticking into that 10 to 15-ish, maybe upwards to 15 to 20 or higher if you have more specific goals for being faster or having higher volume or maintaining those things based off your fitness and your speed. Similarly, I see this the most with the half marathon of all things, is people wanting to run half marathons in like 6 or 8 weeks when they haven't been running at all, in the 4 to 6 weeks going into that. And we really want to make sure that we're easing into these things and leading into that. So I think a good baseline minimum to going into like a half marathon training phase that's 8 to 12 weeks long is having at least 15 to 20 miles per week on feet there, or maybe at least, maybe 3 hours of running per week is a good place to aim for, maybe 2 to 3 as a base, and then working up to 3 to 4 when you're peaking for that half marathon, so to speak. I think somewhere between 20 to 30 miles for like a peaking half marathon training is probably a good goal for most of you, considering that your long run is going to work up eventually to being 10, 11, 12 miles per week. And so then you're getting maybe another 10 or 11, 12, 15 miles per week across the week in 2 or 3 other runs, so 3 or 4 runs per week total. So thinking about maintaining maybe a base of like 15 miles per week, something like that, maybe a long run of about an hour or an hour and a half if your goal is to be able to kind of go into a half marathon at any point in time, and or, just thinking about extending that timeline if you're someone who, pulls that back a little bit more in the off season and giving your body time to ease in and adapt and pull back towards that goal over time. Similarly, when we start getting into our marathon, our ultra marathoners, people who are going to be looking at running, and keep in mind here, I'm speaking to like very gen pop, beginner to intermediate plus people here, not necessarily like advanced athletes or very high end runners. Most of the people listening to this, I think, fall into those buckets of like pretty well trained recreational people versus like everyday people, maybe not people who are really high mileage runners, which can fall into the buckets of some of these sports like marathons or ultramarathons, we want to think about maybe maintaining or having a baseline before we ramp up to train of at least 15, if not 20 miles per week, kind of as a minimum there, thinking about being able to have about maybe at least 3, preferably maybe 4 hours a week of running on our feet per week as like a good maintenance there. Keeping a long run of maybe double digits, an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, or having that as a baseline kind of going into training, or about a maybe give or take a 20-ish mile week, especially if you're thinking about ramping up to peaking around 40, 45, 50 miles per week. Again, I'm not really speaking to the people that are maybe doing really high volume stuff, but when you're training for marathons or ultra marathons, you are probably going to be running somewhere between 6 to 8 hours a week at a minimum at the peak of those trainings. So you want to think about, having a good baseline that's why I like, at least 3, if not 4 hours a week of running, I think is a good place to start to kind of build from and titrate towards that, to start building that accumulation of time and volume on feet, especially if we're thinking about trying to get in a long run, upwards of 3 or 4 hours, depending on the goal, maybe even 5 or so if you are training for ultra marathons, depending on the distance in the train. But having a good base going into that will make a huge difference. I think when it comes to longer running goals like the half marathon, the marathon, the ultra, people think that you're just going to take this linear approach and every single week you're just going to build straight in a linear line and you're going to adapt to every single week. But there's so much benefit to having area under the curve or a base build phase or a period of time where you're just accumulating volume and that like 20-ish to 30 mile per week range, maybe 30 to 40. If you're a little bit of a higher volume runner, you can maintain a little bit more. Again, that can keep titrating up for people who are more advanced, more specifically runners. Most of the people here aren't listening to this, so that's not who I'm speaking to, but you can scale this advice to yourself. And then being able to ramp up the volume that you need to peak for that goal that you have over the course of potentially 8 or 12 weeks leading into a specific race prep cycle going into that. And I really can't overemphasize how much like base build programs or base build phases or long periods of time accumulating just aerobic fitness, maybe some speed work and fast work mixed in with there as well, to just develop your fitness before going into that race peaking and training cycle will be so helpful. And so if you aren't going to maintain that in your off season to kind of keep accumulating fitness there and maintaining that, or plan for having a kind of a base build or a ramp up phase before your race phase. I think people often only think of, for all these race distances goals, they think of just the racing phase. So I'm going to run this race and it's in 8 weeks and I'm going to do an 8-week plan. I'm going to get there. And you will be able to increase your mileage and what you can tolerate and what you can do slightly during that, but you're not going to make these noticeable accumulative fitness, inches or fitness gains or any of that stuff during just that quick period of time. So you really want to think about, your aerobic fitness and what your body can tolerate and the volume it can handle and all that stuff as a long-term game. And the more time you spend with that area under the curve of a slightly higher mileage, potentially than like none or dropping it really low, far down in your off season or between seasons, the more fitness and the more aerobic capacity you can pull from then to build on when going for that next race training goal, especially if you're someone who's like, I want to PR in the next race I do, or I want to improve year to year. And this doesn't mean we always have to be out here chasing like our best performance. Absolutely not. We do want to have fun, but I share this all to encourage you to train in a safe and smart way. And I think that it's totally fine to be a seasonal runner. If you only want to run in the spring or the summer when it's warm, or the fall, or potentially vice versa, if you prefer, running in the fall or the winter, just maintaining enough fitness that you can do the thing that you want to do without it kind of blowing up your body in the process is really what I'm trying to encourage you to do. And so a general rule of thumb is like decrease what you did at your peak or what you did at what you need to do or whatever you need for the goal that you're trying to set in the future by like 30%. And that's a good place to maintain for. I would probably decrease no more than 50%, even if you're in strength or in off season, and making sure you're keeping some quality work in there. And I say this from love in my heart as someone who has done this. I spent a really long time developing so much fitness and getting so much better at running and coming back to running and getting into trail running and ultra running from like 2017, 2018 through the end of 2020 into the beginning of 2021. And then finishing my PhD and life just went crazy. So 2021, I felt like running just did not click for me. And then I went into 2022. And as soon as I started to try to build back up that fitness that I lost for about a year and a half of detraining, I got injured, which extended that to be like kind of 2 years of detraining. And I lost almost all of that fitness that I had gained in those first few years of me doing, trail and ultra running. And it really, really sucked. Let me tell you, that was a blow to my ego. Yes, to some degree, I had a soft tissue injury. So, that takes forever to come back from, and I had to run slower and easier for that. But if I'm being honest, I lost a lot of fitness, and it really, really sucked. And I had to have a coming to God talk with myself and my ego of like, this sucks. You're going to have to ease back in. You're going to have to be smart about it. And you're going to have to, especially having a soft tissue injury, like you're going to have to ease in even more than you think so your body doesn't blow up in the process. And I take the same approach now, even this past year coming off my 50 miler, which you can see in my other videos. I shared all my training for that. In my off season, I did kind of have a month of like pretty much no wonky minimal running. And then I had a month of kind of easing back in. And then I kind of got back to it. But I spent about, 8 weeks kind of base building before I started to build up my volume and kind of took that in titrations. So my body could adapt to that, especially I have hypermobility. So I'm very prone to soft tissue injuries or nags and niggles. So I'm very, very cautious about that with myself even more, especially coming off that injury before. Like I'd rather pull back or pause or pull back volume or, extend where I'm at in my training program for a few weeks and manage something than keep pushing through and have it be chronic or kind of constantly there. And so, upon, what am I saying here? Building on all of this, essentially the take-home message here today is that if you do want to run a race, multiple times across a year, or you want to run a race in the future after you do a race, and or you want to maintain some fitness or build that across time, I really encourage you, even if you don't want to run to a high capacity year-round, that is totally fine, to maintain just at least enough to keep you at the base where you need to be in order to kind of ramp up to that goal shortly and quickly, or build in and plan for an extended base build or prep or ease in or build in phase before you start peaking and prepping for that specific race. And that's totally okay. You don't have to maintain that fitness if you don't want to. If you are sick of running, you hate it, you want to take a break, I do encourage you to do some sort of cardiovascular cross training so you don't lose cardiovascular fitness entirely. But just, these are like kind of the two options. There's no shame in either of these. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that so many of clients, come to us and they've never been explained this in the past. And we are, we as coaches here at the List Method are constantly having these conversations with people of like, hey, let's adjust these timelines and these goals, or let's ease you into this program before we put you in it because we don't want to blow you up. We want to make sure that you're safe and smart about the progression that you're taking. And so it's no fault of you guys for not knowing this. I feel like this isn't talked about enough in the fitness industry. And I think so many regular Gen Pop people that are recreational runners deal with so many little, again, the nags and the niggles, and they're so frustrated with them. And I think this along with managing volume and ramping and easy in general and developing the fitness that you need is a really key component to that, to just kind of keep exposing your body to that stimulus that you need for these goals that you have so you can keep building that or at least maintaining it across time. So I hope this kind of chit chat was helpful. This has just been coming up a lot recently, and I thought it'd be worth sitting down and kind of outlining this a little bit more for you guys so that way, you maintain what you need, you train smart, and you can still reach your goals over time. So thank you so much for tuning in. Again, if you learned something, rate, review, subscribe, like, comment, all of the things. And otherwise, I will catch you guys on the next episode.